the all-new That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business, with new episodes each weekday morning on thatbusinessnetwork.com, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today, I'm very happy to have a very special guest with me today, Ronald Recardo, managing partner of the Catalyst Consulting Group, and he is involved in anything related to business. 9 different books published, over 60 different publications. He is a professor. He is an experienced business professional, and he's in studio with me today to discuss strategic planning, also team building, and also how to cut costs inside a business without using those typical cost-cutting techniques that so many managers use. So, Ronald, welcome to the program today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So first off, Ronald, just tell us a bit more about your business background.
Sure. 30-year career. It spans being an entrepreneur. So early in my career, I started flipping houses. So I would buy a house, fix it up, turn it around, realize the real money was not in that. The real money, at least where I live in Connecticut, it was going from raw land to a subdivision. So I actually went and I bought a tract of land. I put a road in, I had it all engineered, and then I sold the lots individually. Did that a couple of times and got a bit frustrated with working with some of the, the tradespeople. And then from there, I went to corporate. I worked my way up. I was an executive at Johnson & Johnson, an executive at Fidelity, worked in the Big Five where I ran a practice in strategy, and then I started the Catalyst Consulting Group and been doing that since 93.
And the mission of the Catalyst Consulting Group is to help other fellow entrepreneurs, business professionals, get ahead of the game. How do you differentiate yourself from the other consulting groups that are out there?
Great question. When I was an executive, I hired consultants. And I kind of learned from what worked, what didn't work, what did I like, what didn't I like from a consumer standpoint. And one of the things that annoyed me with some of the bigger firms was people like you and I, Jamie, would be partners. But the people who did the work were kids 2 years removed from sneakers. So you kind of felt like they were learning on my dime as opposed to providing a lot of content. So when I established Catalyst Consulting, it's a non-leverage model. So what does that mean in English layman's terms? There's no junior people. Everyone is either a successful entrepreneur, a former partner in the Big Five, or it's been a corporate executive. So it's gray hair to gray hair. Everybody's got like a 30-year track record. The second area where we differentiate is speed, time. And, think about it. If you're a small cap company and you've got competitors, often you're all trying to do the same thing. If you're able to implement faster, you get the results faster. And frankly, sometimes they'll never catch up. It's kind of like a road race.
Yeah.
So if you can get it done fast, that's an advantage.
I definitely like how your consulting group is all experienced professionals that have actually walked the walk, because I come across a lot of consulting groups. I mean, the main person really knows their stuff, but then they hire like a lot of interns and people underneath of them that they're kind of learning, like you said, on your dime and everything. And so I commend you for that, and definitely sets you apart from so many other consulting groups. Now, you're a specialist in so many different areas of business. Your resume reads like 3 pages long with all the different publications and accomplishments that you've accomplished in business. But let's go into a couple areas here. You've written on how to cut costs inside of business without doing the typical eliminating a personnel and then trimming back salaries, the typical things that a manager would come in and do. What are some ways to grow a business, trim costs, and economic instability?
Let's start with the cost side of the equation. What's the biggest mistake people make? In larger companies, what they often do is an across-the-board budget cut. Now think about how that doesn't make sense. It assumes every department is either equally strategic or equally inefficient. Now think about that. That's an absolutely wrong assumption. So often across-the-board budget cuts don't work because you're cutting everything equally, whereas you may say, we're an R&D function. We're not cutting that. Matter of fact, maybe in bad times, maybe we double down and maybe we'll outsource some non-strategic services. So the first mistake is across the board budget cuts. The second thing is looking at how we do things. Think about, let me pick on government for an example. I live in Connecticut. Every time I go to the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicle, I walk out of there both shaking my head and a bit frustrated.
Right.
I suspect you probably have a similar experience in Florida. And it's not that the people are bad, it's their processes are so inefficient. You sit there, you wait, you fill out the same paperwork 5 times. You stop, you start. Whereas if you can improve the efficiency of your activities, you reduce cost, And de facto, you can employ your personnel and your resources and your budget more efficiently.
How does company culture come into play with when you enter an organization? I mean, that has to be a huge hurdle to get over for any consultant.
Coincidentally, I had a conversation from a large company the other day. They wanted us to restructure, and they call it HR transformation, transform their HR function from an administrative, tactical, and I'll call it, touchy-feely kind of function. And they wanted it to become more strategic and frankly more impactful. And I challenged the CHRO. I said, we've done this before. We did it at Nielsen. We did it at Fidelity. We did it at Pfizer. I said, are you willing to trade out personnel? And there was a long, pregnant pause. And I said, I take that as a no. Your culture's paternalistic. He said, yes. I said, well, think about it. Would you go to a podiatrist and ask the podiatrist to do heart surgery? And he laughs. Well, then there's going to be some people in HR, and I'm just picking on HR as an example, who they either can't or won't. And if you keep all of those people, now I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting you take out an eraser and fire everybody willy-nilly. You try to train, you try to coach, you try to find a role, but there's some people who either can't do it or won't do it. And the key here is in culture, understanding what you can get done and what your constraints are, and then build a solution that conforms to those constraints.
Within a large organization, where do you see a lot of the excess? Is there a certain department or area of a business that managers seem to kind of, front load, and then you come in there and say, you really don't need all of that, resources going to that one area of the business?
I wish I had a silver bullet and I can answer it. I don't want to avoid your question. My experience in working with over 140 companies personally is the answer is it depends. It's situational. In some environments, there's too many salespeople. In other environments, they have, IT is like the world. In other environments, it's the operations people. I think what you really need to do is to start with your strategy. And forget all the mumbo jumbo consulting. What are you trying to do?
Right.
How do you win? And then ultimately, what's the most strategic processes, the most strategic functions? Let me give you an example. We do a lot of work in pharmaceuticals. If you really want to simplify it, you can't be world-class across the entire value chain. If you really want to win in pharma, you have to have the best R&D and the best sales. You don't have to be world-class at manufacturing products.
I often wonder how pharmaceutical companies even survive with all the regulation, all the money, and all the investment that's got to come into just even getting a drug to the marketplace. I mean, it just amazes me that we even get drugs onto the marketplace these days.
I agree. There's a lot of regulation. The hit rates are very, very low. But truth be told, the profit margins are quite high. When I worked at J&J, it was a flat organization. The average director, all in, base, bonus, and equity, was making in the 400s.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. A lot of money, but a lot of risk. That's a trade-off.
Yes. Well said.
So when you come into an organization, is there a certain area that usually is struggling? I mean, sales is the lifeblood of any business. You got to have great salesmen, but being a great salesman and training a great sales staff is a very big challenge for any organization. Is sales often a problem inside organizations?
It's sales, and sometimes it's even above that. So I know, as I understand, your listeners are by and large small cap companies, growth companies, correct?
Yes.
Well, let's start with the founder, the owner. Often a founder has technical skills, sees an unmet market need, is able to get themselves entry and grow the company to a certain level. And then often what happens is they lack the professionalism as a leader to take it to the next step. So often growth is curtailed by, quite honestly, the sophistication of the leader. They don't understand how to grow a company. They're technically oriented. They're good at financial forecasting. Here's what we made last quarter, last year, let me make an assumption. But they're not good at strategic planning. And there's a difference between those two things. Strategic planning is really more about markets, customers, size of markets. How do we differentiate, positioning? That's different than being able to say, here's how much money we made, let me make some assumptions, and we'll do some creative writing.
I think you just raised a great point there. It's like, everybody starts a business, they get it to a certain level. Those who are excellent leaders can develop it, and delegate very well. I know myself, I struggle with that. I struggle with the growth element. Is good leadership also knowing when to step back and let somebody else take the helm in front of you?
Well said. Let me digress and I'll connect the dots. We recently did a study of 500 outstanding performers from major companies who are at a senior VP or a P&L level. And we asked them a simple question. What separates you from people who tread water and people who are underwater? In other words, what are the attributes? And there were some surprises. Number one was all of them said in different words, we're really good at playing chess. What does that mean? We think ahead. We think about here's where we want to go. How do we win the game? If somebody does X, here's how we'll respond Y. So it's more of a proactive modeling. Number two is good leadership does not equal being liked. A mistake a lot of people make is, let me avoid making difficult decisions because I don't want to make enemies. And sometimes a good leader has to put on the black hat and say, I heard what you said, but here's what we're going to do. So a lot of it's on the leadership side. A lot of it is on also not being overly consensus driven. So to your point, you don't want to be Simon Legree. But I was in a meeting last week. It was $1 billion company, and I almost clutched my heart. They actually voted on every decision.
Wow.
And I said to myself, well, is the leader abrogating his responsibility? He owns 51% of the vote. Mm-hmm. Right? There's times when you say, I heard what you said, but here's what we're going to do.
Good point. Currently talking to Ronald Recardo, managing partner of the Catalyst Consulting Group. Again, 9 books written, 60 different publications, adjunct professor, and an all-around great business consultant, having worked with over 100 different companies. So if you can use his services, reach out to him, catalystconsultinggroup.org. Again, catalystconsultinggroup.org. When we come back from the break, I'm going to talk with him about strategic planning. He hinted at how, you got to have a plan, you got to have a, path, a direction on where you're going to go into your business, and he's an expert in that area as well as many others as well. So we'll cover that when we come back from the break on That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. And welcome back to That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. My guest today is Ronald Recardo, managing partner with the Catalyst Consulting Group. Learn more, catalystconsultinggroup.org. And Ron, let's talk, about the importance of strategic plan, having a plan. So for all the small business owners out there, a lot of them just jump into the business because they know how to do something. They don't really plan, and then they start to grow, and everything starts to overwhelm them and fall apart. How can they, better protect themselves and better plan by planning?
Sure. Think of growth as having a 2-lane highway. There's a bunch of things you can do. They call it the internal growth engine, and then there's the external growth engine. So when you look at internal, it's things like pricing, it's promotion, it's positioning, it's how you package your products and services. And often an opportunity to grow your business is by tweaking some of those things. Let me give you an example, a big mistake most small companies make. They get involved in fighting the wrong battle. What do I mean by that? You and I are competing. We're fierce competitors. And what do? We start playing around with price. You reduce, I reduce, you reduce. It's ping pong. Mm-hmm. And what are we really doing? We're lowering our top line and we're lowering our profitability.
Right.
So competing on price is a no-win outcome, right?
Right.
Often it's a function of the positioning isn't effective. It hasn't differentiated yourself in the marketplace. You don't have the right offerings, product, service mix. Let me give you an example. We work with a company that produces manufacturing, and they manufacture products, and they measure very, very finely manufactured products. So, for example, they make products that measure turbines that go in jet engines. They saw themselves solely as making money by producing widgets. We looked at it and said, look at IBM. They don't even produce the boxes anymore. They don't make PCs. They make their money through consulting. And there's more money and higher profit margins. So we looked at them and said, why aren't you offering allied services that support your manufacturing products? They implemented that. Their revenues increased 45%.
Just by adding into the consulting element?
Exactly.
That seems to be a growing area of business. I remember when I was younger, I don't remember seeing as many coaches and consultants in business. Is it a growing area of business?
Well, I'll call it professional services, not just advisory service, not just consulting. But you need to look at how do you make money and what do customers need and how do they use your service? And many times people have blinders. I'm good at X, I've always done X, so therefore I'm going to make widgets. Another huge mistake they make is they're competing in the wrong space. Let me take an example. Apple. They focus on looking for unmet needs. So think about 7, 8 years ago. They looked and said, hey, look, if we can put a lot of content on the web and we can charge for that content, we can make $1 gazillion. Hence, iTunes. How about Apple Pay? You go there, you're able, instead of whipping out your card, you do Apple Pay. So if you're able to identify an unmet market need, get in first. It's almost like a race. You're starting on the 20, 25, 30-yard line. You can never catch them.
But it seems like today everything has been done, and that's a common complaint that I hear from so many business owners. They don't know how to differentiate themselves. They just know how to copy somebody else's business model. How can they get new ideas? How can they, get those creative juices flowing?
One way is to not be internally focused. I've had several clients that I call them, they're engineering driven. They want to make the best widget, but they don't really take a step before they invest all this money and say, is there a market for this widget? Who am I competing with? Am I going to go head to head with GE? I wouldn't want to place that bet and come out ahead, right?
Absolutely.
So I think what you have to do is you have to first look at who are your customers, who are potential customers, in tangential markets, adjacent markets. You want to look at how they use your products and services, and what are their unmet needs? What are the things that people scratch their head about, and be the first in? Like, I'm 59 years old. I think when I went to high school, they used to, how they made photocopies? A mimeograph.
Mimeograph? I've never heard that term. Mimeograph. That's new for me.
Think about back in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
If you wanted to buy a video, what did you do? You went to a video store. There's no such thing as a video store. It's Netflix, right? You download it from the cloud.
Yep.
So somebody saw a different mousetrap. They went in that direction, and basically they turned the lights out of a business and an industry that was once very large.
Yeah, that industry still amazes me. I remember seeing those first red boxes go up in front of 7-Elevens and thought that was the dumbest thing in the world. I was like, who's going to buy videos or rent videos sitting in front of a 7-Eleven? Next thing you know, they're a huge company and knocking Blockbuster along with Netflix, up there helping them to knock them out. But yeah, Blockbuster's gone now. So
yeah, is that scary? That was a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah, and that's an excellent case study to study. How can a business like that, who was in the forefront of their industry, completely fail? I just don't understand that. Was that just lack of management, lack of innovation, just people that are hard-headed? I don't know.
For bigger companies, often they look at the space they're in. So I have a client who's in aerospace and defense, and they make missiles and they make shells. And I said, guys, are you looking at disruptive technologies? And the CEO had me laughing. He goes, I can't even spell that. What does it mean? I said, are there things out in the horizon that can put the lights out in your company? And he paused. He goes, I'm not sure. I said, well, you want to look at industries. You want to look at think tanks. You want to look at academic. You want to look at small companies that have unique technology. I said, for example, sooner or later, they're going to invent lasers. Right now, they have rail guns. They don't even fire projectiles that explode. They fire a hunk of metal. It goes so fast when it hits something, it just obliterates it. I said, those are things that are going to make your bombs and your shells obsolete. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like I pulled the plug from the room and the air just, it really caught him. It was like somebody slapping him across the face.
So I think it gets to the idea that people get comfortable in what they're doing, and they forget to innovate and I know that's happened to me. I've gotten comfortable in my real estate business. The market was changing around me. Next thing you know, I'm out in the cold.
Well said. So one of the things you want to look at on the external growth engine, going back to your earlier question, is you want to be tracking companies that are on the forefront of new technology. You want to be looking at maybe a joint venture, an alliance. And people may say, well, I'm a small company. What do you mean a joint venture? Two companies that get together, they have some level of synergies. Maybe they integrate their technologies and their services, and they produce a superordinate offering, a product or service. 1+1 = 4. It's a win for everybody.
Yeah, and it speaks to the point that I've talked about on this program, and that one of my good friends who's written about it. We're entering what he calls the collaboration age, in which businesses are beginning to work together. It's not so much about what you know anymore, because anybody can Google what you know and figure that out. It's about working together and producing, as you say, the 1+1 = 4 through the synergy. Is that a trend that's growing in business that you're seeing, or are you still seeing businesses being reserved when saying, I don't want to work with anybody else?
I see, great point. I see two buckets. I see a bucket of businesses that are run by passionate, very well thought out, very strategic thinkers, and they're exactly in that bucket you're talking about. And then I have to be honest with you, I still see a group of people where there's a lot of empty suits. The senior executives are not the best and the brightest. They just stayed the longest, and my wife will often say to me at the end of the day, honey, how was your day? And sometimes I'll come home and I'll say, honey, I can't believe that blah, blah, blah makes $1 million a year. It's just a person who's in the right place at the right time, had the right pedigree, he's Ivy League, he's ex-GE, but doesn't necessarily have all the skills. And often that's a function of they got to the corner office because they were able to put out fires the best. They were the best person when there was a crisis to deal with the crisis, but they're really not good at growing the business. Prime example, when things get bad, what's the obvious first step? Let's take out heads, let's cut costs, let's reduce travel and entertainment. To be perfectly blunt, my 14-year-old son can do that math, right? A CEO should be able to think a lot more strategically than let me just, save myself the prosperity.
And I think that's an excellent point, because I know myself, I'm a good leader. I do things very well, but I know I struggle with delegation and growth. And I think it's over the last couple of years, I've come to realize that I need to step back, and I'm not a number one person. I'm a number two person, number three person. And so there's so many people out there that have that great idea, but they got to know when to step back and recognize their weaknesses and let somebody else take the helm. And that to me is really true leadership.
I agree. Hire people that address your personal weaknesses. And then I'm a great believer. When I've worked with a lot of fine, very successful entrepreneurs and leaders, there's one thing that stands out. They know what to measure. So metrics, you create a strategy, you translate that strategy into a series of measures. You understand what drives the outcome. So if you're a pharmaceutical company again, and you're looking at revenues, if you study historical performance, you may find that the number of calls your sales force makes to ultimately doctors, that drives your revenue stream. You always want to understand your performance drivers relative to your key outcomes. And if you have metrics, then you tie it to your performance management and compensation structure, and you differentiate performance. Well, you and I have been around the block. You ask every major company, and even some of the smaller ones, do you pay for performance? They invariably say yes. But the reality is if you have three people that make the same amount of money, and you give them a 1% raise difference, have you really differentiated performance? I would say no.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's just all about knowing when to step back. Because I've always been a very hard worker. I'm somebody who gets out there and I get stuff done. But then I find myself doing like the $10 an hour job, the $12 an hour job. And, that CEO mindset is something I just feel like that I don't have. And it's, I've come to a realization of itself over the last couple of years. But I really think that there's so many people out there with that same mentality. But because they've grown a business to a certain point, they think, oh, I'm a great leader. I've done so well. But yet so many people can't really get to that next higher level. And it's probably because they need to step back and get somebody with that CEO mindset, like you were talking about, using metrics. And I don't do any of that stuff. I don't think like that. I think completely different. CEOs think like that.
Well, Jamie, I think it's insightful, and it says a lot about you as a leader. To be able to take a step back, look in the mirror, and say, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not good at. I look at my own self, and I tend to be a detail-oriented person. So sometimes that can come across as too controlling. So to your point about delegation, is to be able to, delegate meaningfully, get the right people on your team, create a team where there's an esprit de corps. That's hard to do.
It is. And there's just so many inputs, and everybody's got their own 2 cents to throw in about what you should be doing. And it gets to be overwhelming at that point.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, Ronald, we got to wrap up the discussion. Any closing thoughts or points you'd like to leave us with? I know you've written 9 books. Anything you'd like to promote and anything you're working on currently?
Rather than me promoting myself, I think let's look at the from the perspective of your listeners. I think summarizing, how do you grow a business? 1 is think several moves ahead. 2, balance your perspective, internal and external. Yes, you have to understand what you're good at. You have to understand your business model, but you also need to be really aware of your competitors, size of market, growth rates, profitability. What are you doing relative to your competitors? All that external view.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to make tough decisions, be decisive. And to your point, you need to be able to build a team so that you have enough hands and capability to be able to delegate and to ultimately grow the company.
Good discussion. Ronald Recardo, managing partner of the Catalyst Consulting Group. Thank you so much for being with me on the program today.
Thank you so much for your time.
And learn more, catalystconsultinggroup.org. New episodes, again, each weekday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on thatbusinessnetwork.com. And if you'd like to come onto the program, we'd love to hear your story too. Visit tbsinterview.com for more information. You've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.